Humans possess a startling capacity to endure misery. We will voluntarily subject ourselves to years of grueling study or agonizing physical labor, all to reach a single distant goal. To understand why we do this, we have to distinguish between two concepts we usually treat as the same thing: purpose and meaning. Purpose is the objective destination. It is the tangible what of an action. Earning a specific degree or building a successful company. These are concrete, definable endpoints. Meaning is subjective. It is the value, the significance, and the emotional resonance attached to that destination. It is the why, and it dictates how the journey feels while you are in the middle of it. Purpose is the address you type into a GPS. Meaning is the fuel. It is the belief that makes the trip feel worthwhile, especially when the road becomes difficult. Because meaning is the required propellant for enduring hardship, whoever defines what a struggle signifies holds immense control over human endurance. Modifying the subjective meaning attached to a task changes a person's internal cost-benefit calculation. Suddenly, painful or tedious objectives become achievable. This is central to effective physical therapy. The objective purpose is recovery, but a good therapist reframes the daily struggle. The pain isn't just a sign of limitation. It is the active, quantifiable reassertion of control over the body. This mechanism scales directly to the workplace. Narrowly defined industrial tasks, like putting a single component into a slot, often lead to burnout because the internal meaning is pure monotony. However, connecting that same physical legal to a humanitarian outcome, like building life-saving respirators, transforms the work. The physical task remains identical, but the subjective meaning shifts towards saving lives. Linking goals to innate values, like family or community, creates more sustainable drive than extrinsic motivators, like money or vanity. When meaning aligns with authentic inner values, it produces a self-sustaining cycle of resilience. Human output reaches its peak not by changing the work, but by changing the narrative surrounding it. Our drive for significance is a biological constant. If we fail to generate our own meaning, external systems will aggressively step in to supply one for us. Historical elites, from monarchs to religious hierarchies, weaponized this vulnerability. They directed massive scales of mass labor by controlling what that labor meant, reducing the need for expensive military force. They utilized the strategic deferral of gratification, moving the ultimate reward for earthly effort entirely into the afterlife. This deferred narrative reframes earthly poverty and systemic exploitation. They are no longer viewed as injustices, but as spiritual purification tests required for eternal bliss. The divine mandate serves a similar political function. It transforms standard civil obedience into a sacred, non-negotiable duty. Framing political dissent as a crime against the cosmic order effectively silences rebellion. The risk of opposing the hierarchy moves from temporary punishment to eternal suffering. By controlling the narrative of meaning, elites stabilize their earthly authority. They ensure compliance in the present by shifting the perceived value of hardship to a spiritual horizon. Secular taxation relies on enforcement and often breeds resentment. Spiritual taxation, fueled by manipulated meaning, can generate enthusiastic compliance even during times of hardship. Tithing reframes the act of giving away scarce income. For a struggling farmer, this transaction becomes a spiritual purpose, a low-cost insurance policy against divine disfavor. The sale of indulgences took this further, literally monetizing the forgiveness of sins and the promise of reduced time in purgatory. The irony is profound. Materially impoverished peasants bypassed their immediate survival needs to purchase an invisible, eternal commodity. Manipulating meaning creates a highly efficient, unidirectional transfer of wealth from the productive classes straight to the ruling hierarchy. History's massive monuments and entrenched wealth are the physical manifestations of this extracted psychological energy. Doctrines that rebrand poverty as a spiritual virtue prevent the formation of class consciousness. If suffering is seen as a prerequisite for salvation, there is little incentive to seek systemic change. Psychological persuasion is often more potent than military force. It allows power to operate by convincing a population to participate enthusiastically in their own exploitation. This vulnerability still exists in modern society. We remain susceptible to external narratives that rush in to supply us with a sense of significance. This understanding should prompt a critical audit of your deepest commitments, your career path, your financial goals, and your long-term loyalties. Are your life's greatest pursuits genuinely driven by your own innate values, or are you executing a pre-packaged narrative designed to serve a system you don't even recognize? We have spent decades chasing the idea that meaning is an intellectual achievement. We treat it like a top-down exercise, believing that if we draft the right mission statement or set the right goals, purpose will follow. This creates a common friction. You can climb to the summit of a major career goal and feel remarkably empty, while a small, unplanned moment feels incredibly rich. This happens because meaning is a profound, felt experience rather than a cognitive decision. It is a specific neurochemical state hardwired into our fundamental architecture. Without the emotional signals to anchor them, the events of our lives remain neutral facts, floating in the brain's database without any relevance to our well-being. Emotions function as a highly advanced system for assigning value. They act as an internal compass, scanning our environment and tagging people and events with personal importance before we even have a conscious thought about them. To sort this data, the brain uses a metric called valence. This horizontal axis tracks whether an experience feels positive or negative. The second metric is arousal. This vertical axis measures the intensity of the experience, ranging from quiet and calm to high energy and extreme. The brain uses these two dimensions to plot every interaction on a map of priorities. This instant tagging tells us how much a specific goal or event matters to our survival or our flourishing. When an experience is tagged with both high intensity and deep positive value, it becomes sticky, a durable assignment of worth. We recognize this specific biological signature as the feeling of meaning. The Latin root of the word emotion is movere, which means to move. Feelings are action generators, providing the physical impetus required to steer our lives in a specific direction. The pursuit engine runs on positive states like interest and joy. These feelings broaden our mindset, encouraging us to explore new ideas and build the social and intellectual resources that sustain us over time. Our correction engine relies on the energy of negative emotions. Disgust and anger alert us to injustice, providing the pressure needed to change our circumstances. Intense suffering, like the weight of extreme grief, creates a state of internal chaos. To endure this, the human mind is forced to seek out a new narrative that can bring coherence back to the world. This drive for coherence is the labor behind post-traumatic growth. It is a transformation where the energy of that suffering is slowly channeled into a story of service or advocacy, turning senseless pain into an investment in existential purpose. A lifestyle dedicated to avoiding every negative feeling effectively disables this engine. Without the impetus provided by discomfort, we lose the primary biological drive for growth. These engines run on a complex exchange of chemical messengers that translate environmental data into physical drive. Dopamine is the chemical of anticipation. It triggers the craving and drive necessary to pursue a goal, but it is less involved in the actual satisfaction of reaching it. If a pursuit is fueled only by dopamine, the mind can experience a sudden crash or apathy the moment the goal is achieved and the chemical surge vanishes. Serotonin provides the necessary balance. It acts as a biological shock absorber, maintaining the mood stability and patience required to stick with a meaningful pursuit through its most difficult phases. To turn individual effort into communal significance, the brain utilizes oxytocin. This hormone shifts our focus towards trust and attachment, grounding our purpose in the well-being of others. Stress chemicals play a dual role. While adrenaline provides the burst of energy needed for a crisis, sustained levels of cortisol create a high plateau of chronic wear and tear, remodeling the brain for constant defense rather than growth. Enduring meaning is the result of a precise interaction between these systems, where dopamine's drive and serotonin's stability align toward a common end. The raw sensations of pleasure, pain, and fear function as urgent internal bulletins. They are biological signals of importance, alerting us to what is relevant to our survival and our flourishing. A meaningful life is the conscious narrative we build to make sense of those intense signals. It is the story we tell ourselves to integrate our feelings into a larger purpose. That deep feeling of significance is the brain's way of confirming that our actions are in sync with our internal values. It is a biological yes to the direction we have chosen. Choosing constant comfort, or the total avoidance of emotional pain, means bypassing the very mechanics of growth. Significance is forged in the struggle to make sense of our most difficult feelings. This leaves us with a choice in how we manage our own internal chemistry. Will you spend your life chasing the fleeting dopamine hits of novelty? Or will you endure the work required to transform your deepest struggles into a lasting purpose? To understand human purpose, we have to look past the spiritual definitions. The clearest answer requires an audit of evolutionary biology. In the strictest biological sense, organisms operate as sophisticated vehicles. Their primary mechanical directive is to ensure the propagation of their internal genetic code to the next generation. Traits like bipedalism and massive brain expansion were mechanical advantages. They served as the hardware that allowed our genes to survive a series of generational bottlenecks. But to successfully protect those individual genes, early humans encountered a practical limit. The biological drive toward purely selfish survival reached its peak effectiveness. To bypass this limit, the strategy for replication shifted. The individual's evolutionary success became inextricably linked to the survival of the group, making collective cooperation the new baseline for human success. This pivot changed the definition of purpose. An individual was no longer just a survival machine, but a contributor responsible for the well-being of the wider community. It enabled what anthropologists call the ratchet effect. Each generation learns from the last and adds its own refinements, ensuring that the group's shared knowledge only compounds and moves forward. The development of complex language accelerated this process. Humans gained the ability to teach abstract rules and multi-step instructions, rather than relying on just simple imitation. We see physical evidence of this shift in the invention of tailored clothing. Survival in extreme cold became a technological solution. Preparing hides and using an eyed needle are skills that must be taught, stored outside our DNA, and passed down through culture. At this stage, survival depended more on mastering the group's external software, its rules and technology, than on the individual genetic traits a person inherited at birth. About 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic Revolution introduced a strategy that bypassed the physical constraints of a mobile, hunter-gatherer existence. Humans traded a diverse diet and constant mobility for the predictability of sedentary farming. By domesticating crops like wheat and rice, they generated a consistent, high volume of calories. This storable food surplus supported much denser settlements. For the first time, populations could pack together into permanent villages and eventually the first cities. The social contract adjusted to fit this new reality. Daily purpose was no longer about finding a meal for the day. It was about maintaining the walls, irrigation, and storage systems that kept the surplus safe. Human direction was increasingly defined by the requirements of the human-made system rather than the immediate pressures of the natural environment. The rise of early civilizations in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt was predicated entirely on the successful management of this agricultural surplus. Because a surplus meant not everyone had to farm, a portion of the population could specialize in new roles. This created a workforce of full-time soldiers, merchants, and administrators. This economic shift led to a rigid divide. A massive majority produced the resources, while a small elite class gained control over the storage and distribution of that wealth. Kings, priests, and specialized scribes positioned themselves as the essential managers of this complex system, directing the flow of labor and resources. In these stratified societies, collective purpose was actively engineered. Those at the top used their control over cultural transmission to ensure that the surplus primarily benefited the hierarchy itself. To maintain order, the priestly class developed religious doctrines that framed hard labor and social inequality as cosmically mandated obligations. Rulers used their monopoly over the food supply to buy the loyalty of military enforcers, ensuring that the producers remained compliant with the system's rules. Scribes managed the daily logistics using the specialized technology of literacy. Writing allowed for unchangeable ledgers of taxes, laws, and labor requirements. It functioned as an external hard drive, locking the manufactured purpose of the population into a permanent, enforceable record. For millennia, these religious and administrative frameworks were the primary systems used to organize human direction. But today, the traditional gatekeepers of cultural transmission, the temples and the local rulers, no longer hold a monopoly on the narratives we follow. As the systems that engineered human compliance for thousands of years begin to shift, a new question emerges. If the old structures are fading, what is engineering your purpose today? You're standing at the front of a conference room and you completely blank on the final slide of your presentation. Or maybe you open your phone to see you've been publicly tagged in a highly critical post. Your heart rate spikes, your palms sweat. This physical reaction is the sound of an ancient biological defense mechanism snapping into focus. It is a tangible, physiological reality. This diagram shows the body's central stress command center, the HPA axis. When you experience a social threat, this network immediately floods your bloodstream with cortisol. Your blood pressure rises, and your nervous system gears up for a life or death struggle. Which raises a rather strange question. Why does a missed promotion or a digital embarrassment trigger the exact same biological alarm system designed to save our ancestors from a starving predator? Throughout most of evolutionary history, social rank was entirely straightforward. You got it through physical force. You were the biggest, the strongest, and you used coercion and intimidation to take resources. We share this raw, muscle-based dominance hierarchy with our closest primate cousins. The physical threat is the entire point. But early human survival demanded intense cooperation. Hunting large animals and sharing childcare meant the collective group became far stronger than any single aggressive individual. Bullies suddenly became a liability to survival. If someone became too arrogant or tried to hoard food, the rest of the band would actively push back through gossip, social shaming, ostracization, or even collective violence. Early humans effectively policed and eliminated would-be oppressors. To gain influence without getting exiled, our ancestors adapted. They developed a secondary pathway called prestige. Rather than demanding submission through fear, prestige meant earning deference because you offered demonstrable value, like specific knowledge or exceptional skill, to the community. Human evolution transformed status from a blunt instrument of terror into a social contract based on community utility. For this new system to function, the group had to know you were actually useful. Evolutionary biologists call this costly signaling theory. A signal of competence is only believable if it is inherently difficult, risky, or expensive to perform. If anyone could fake it, the signal would be useless. This image shows highly crafted Paleolithic tools. Fashioning these required massive investments of time and focus. You couldn't fake a hunt. And the most powerful signal was generosity. Giving away the spoils to the group proved trustworthiness and built vital social capital. Our biology evolved to heavily reinforce this behavior. When others confer prestige upon us, a neural network called the ventral striatum releases dopamine. Evolution made social acceptance physically euphoric to ensure we kept cooperating. Conversely, being kicked out of an early human group almost guaranteed death by starvation or exposure. To prevent this, the amygdala evolved to treat any drop in social rank or threat of exclusion as a fatal danger. We are literally wired to monitor our social standing as a biological imperative. The trigger is always armed, constantly scanning the environment for threats to our rank. That highly calibrated system worked for mobile hunter-gatherers. Then agriculture arrived. The ability to settle down and produce food surpluses introduced a new variable: permanent, storable property. Surplus meant some people could accumulate vast amounts of wealth, while others specialized in labor. The relatively flat, egalitarian bands fractured into steep, rigid hierarchies. In these larger, denser societies, you could no longer witness everyone's hunting skill or generosity firsthand. Direct proof of utility became harder to track, so status began to rely on visual shortcuts, arbitrary cultural symbols like specific fabrics or formal titles that signaled your rank from a distance. The sociologist Thorsten Veblen studied how the elites in these highly stratified environments maintained their rank. He observed a behavior he called conspicuous consumption. The wealthy secure their status by deliberately buying expensive, entirely useless goods or constructing massive, empty monuments. The sheer waste is the signal. It broadcasts that you command so many resources you can afford to burn them. Civilization took an ancient, pro-social drive meant to foster community cooperation and twisted it into an endless, abstract competition fueled by hoarded wealth and artificial displays. Today, the resources we once shared for group survival are controlled by vast, impersonal institutions. To access the basics, security, healthcare, or a home, we must navigate competitive hierarchies that demand we prove our value every single day. Two specific factors amplify the strain. First, systemic inequality creates constant, highly visible wealth gaps. Second, there is no exit. Ancestrally, you could migrate away from a toxic hierarchy. Today, your fate is tied to the financial and social structures you are born into. Add to that the global scale of modern communication. Instead of comparing ourselves to a local band of 50 people, the internet forces our localized brains into a relentless, unwinnable comparison against the curated highlight reels of billions of people. But the most psychologically damaging factor is the cultural narrative of meritocracy. This ideology insists that success is dictated entirely by individual talent and hard work. When imposed over a deeply unequal system, it strips away any acknowledgement of systemic barriers. If you fail to achieve high status, the system tells you it is entirely your fault. Failure becomes a sign of personal deficiency. Inequality, lack of escape, global comparison, and a culture of personal blame work together to transform external economic disadvantages into a profound internal shame. They leave our biological threat sensors jammed in the on position. So when you feel that wave of imposter syndrome or that crushing burnout after a perceived professional failure, you are not experiencing a character flaw. You're experiencing the biological reaction of a brain operating as it evolved to, trapped inside a societal machine that chronically overstimulates its survival alarms. Over time, this sustained activation of the HPA axis floods the body with stress hormones, contributing heavily to measurable physical breakdowns, from hypertension and cardiovascular disease to severe chronic depression, which forces us to look past our individual symptoms and evaluate the structure itself. Is this baseline of continuous status threat and physiological damage an unavoidable feature of large-scale human civilization? Or is it possible to consciously design a social and economic reality that actually fulfills our evolutionary need to belong, without weaponizing our own biology against us? Modern life carries a heavy background hum of anxiety. From the moment you check your phone, the underlying message is to hustle harder, buy more, and optimize every second. We are told that eventually, once we reach an undefined milestone, we will finally be happy. This cycle has created a specific image of the epicure, the connoisseur of luxury, decadent wines, and 10-course tasting menus. We assume happiness is found in sensory overload, but the historical reality of the man himself is far removed from that image. Born in 341 BC, Epicurus essentially lived on bread and water. To him, getting a small pot of cheese was an incredible rare indulgence. He argued that we are conditioned to believe happiness is additive, the sum total of our achievements and experiences. His philosophy flips this paradigm. True happiness involves a lot less. It is the systematic subtraction of pain and fear. He defined the peak of human happiness as ataraxia, the complete absence of mental disturbance or anxiety. To Epicurus, happiness is simply the baseline state of existing without suffering. He viewed philosophy as a form of therapy for the soul. He established a community known as the Garden, which stood in contrast to the strict social hierarchies of Athens. It was a space where women and slaves were admitted as absolute equals to study the nature of the mind. This community was built on the premise that happiness isn't something you achieve through status. It is what remains once you strip away the unnatural desires and irrational fears that weigh on the mind. Stripping away the mythology of ancient Greece, Epicurus argued that the universe consists of only two physical things: invisible atoms and empty void. Everything we see and touch is just a collection of these building blocks colliding in space. This creates a problem of determinism. If the mind is just a collection of atoms following physical laws, every thought we have would be a chain reaction, like a cosmic game of billiards. We would be biological robots without free will. To solve this, Epicurus theorized that falling atoms occasionally randomly swerve off course. This spontaneous deviation causes atoms to collide and form the physical world. This twitch breaks the chain of cause and effect, creating space for agency, ensuring our actions are not predetermined. Because the universe is not bound by a rigid, deterministic fate, our choices genuinely matter. We possess the physical capacity to make decisions and change the trajectory of our own lives. This leads to the Tetrapharmakos, a 4-part cognitive prescription, originally named after a medical salve used to draw out infections. It is a systematic way to reframe the thoughts that cause us panic. The first maxim is, don't fear God. Epicurus argued that if Dadas are truly perfect and happy, they cannot be bothered by human anger or jealousy. They do not watch us, they do not punish us, and do not meddle with us. Once the fear of divine punishment is removed, you stop waiting for cosmic justice or karma to balance the scales. You are forced to rely on yourself and logical systems to handle the wrongs you encounter on Earth. The second maxim is, don't worry about death. According to atomic theory, the soul requires the body to hold it together. The moment the body dies, those atoms disperse and consciousness ceases. This represents the symmetry of time. The billions of years that passed before you were born caused you no pain. The billions of years that follow your death will be the same, a state of peaceful non-existence. Fearing a future you will never consciously inhabit only introduces suffering into the present moment. By accepting that the end brings no pain, you focus your intensity on your life right now. The third maxim is, what is good is easy to get. Epicurus divided our wants into 3 categories: natural and necessary, natural but unnecessary, and vain or empty desires. These bars show the biological limits of desire. Natural needs like water and shelter have a stopping point. Vain desires for fame or immense wealth are limitless. No matter how much you get, you will always want more, guaranteeing a life of frustration. By pruning back empty desires, your needs are easily met. This reduces financial anxiety and allows a modest treat, like that pot of cheese, to become a source of genuine joy. The final maxim is, what is terrible is easy to endure. Epicurus noted that pain is typically either intense but short-lived, or chronic but dull enough for the mind to find moments of relief. He practiced this at the end of his life. While dying of painful kidney stones, he wrote a letter to a friend declaring it a happy day. He focused entirely on the mental pleasure of their past conversations to counterbalance his physical suffering. Once you address the fear of death, the gods, and unmet desires, the mind reaches a baseline of tranquility. You find a state of peace that external forces cannot easily break. To protect this tranquility, Epicurus advised his followers to lathe biosis, or live in obscurity. This was a defense mechanism against the political and social chaos of the outside world. Today, this means stepping out of the attention economy. It is the choice to stop performing for the validation of strangers and to protect your peace of mind by living authentically rather than publicly. But living in obscurity does not mean isolation. Epicurus viewed platonic friendship as the absolute pinnacle of human security. He believed that a small, trusted community provided a biological safety net that fame never could. Curating a social circle based on shared values and mutual support is the ultimate resilience against the world's chaos. True security is found in knowing someone has your back entirely. This philosophy was threatening to those in power. Telling a Roman general to sit in a garden and ignore politics was seen as subversive, and early Christians reviled the denial of the immortal soul as a dangerous heresy. This hostility culminated in Dante's Inferno. He placed the Epicureans deep in hell, locking them inside flaming iron coffins for the crime of believing that the soul dies with the body. Despite this, the ideas survived. After being rediscovered in the 15th century, Epicurean materialism went on to influence vastly different modern thinkers, from Thomas Jefferson to Karl Marx. These thinkers were drawn to the same core premise: we are temporary collections of atoms united for a brief moment in an infinite void. If our time is finite, we do not have to participate in the pursuit of status or fame. Rebellion is found in the choice to look at an ordinary life and find it completely sufficient. For most of our history, humans didn't have to look very far to find their purpose. The answers usually came from a pre-written cosmic script, often a divine text or a strict tradition that provided a clear, step-by-step instruction manual for how to live. But as those traditional foundations face modern scrutiny, that manual is disappearing for many. The empirical reality of our origins replaces that manual with cosmology. Our existence starts precisely 13.8 billion years ago, expanding outward from an incredibly hot, dense point into a vast, unguided universe. From that initial expansion, it took immense stretches of time for a specific, unintentional mechanism to take over on Earth. We are the complex survivors of a nearly 4 billion-year chain of biological evolution, driven entirely by random genetic changes and the filtering of natural selection. This scientific reality removes the concept of a predetermined cosmic blueprint. There is no specific, pre-written plan waiting out there for humanity to discover. Stripping away that old script leaves an immediate psychological vacuum. We arrive very late in this immense astronomical timeline, incredibly complex, entirely undefined, and with no overarching purpose handed to us upon arrival. Arriving perfectly blank is a terrifying philosophical crisis. If our species is the result of astronomical odds and biological randomness, it means we are born without a fixed human nature or a pre-assigned soul. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre captured the weight of this condition with a single phrase: existence precedes essence. If you make a coffee mug, its essence, to hold liquid, is decided before it ever exists. But for humans, Sartre argued, we simply appear first. We exist, and then we have to define our own essence entirely through the choices we make and the actions we take every single day. The immediate consequence of this radical freedom is what existentialists called anguish. It is the dizzying realization that there are no ultimate excuses and no higher powers to shift the blame onto. You make a choice, and you stand entirely alone and bearing the responsibility for it. When you make a significant choice, you are presenting a model of humanity. Your actions propose how a person should act in that moment, for everyone. This existential dread marks the mandatory starting point for an authentic life. You can reframe that terrifying void by looking closely at the math of your own biology. Every living thing represents an unbroken chain of successful reproduction that survived mass extinctions, cosmic radiation, and global climate shifts. The sheer improbability of your specific life existing right now is staggering. That 4 billion-year chain of survival provides a rational baseline for valuing life. Existence is the outcome of a tenacious, mathematically improbable persistence. If existentialism defines the scope of our freedom, humanist psychology, the third force, defines the potential within it. This diagram illustrates the framework used to organize that freedom into a proactive vision for personal growth. Notice how the structure keeps building upward. This approach rejects the idea that humans are fundamentally broken or defined by conflict. Instead, it posits that we have an innate, lifelong drive towards psychological health and peak growth. This upward momentum is self-actualization. It means you take the blank slate of your existence and actively develop your specific capabilities, working to express the most authentic version of yourself over the course of your life. The indifference of the universe is required for this to work. A pre-written destiny would leave no room for your agency. The void is simply the blank canvas your biological drive needs to start painting. But creating that meaning is difficult when our brains constantly drift away from the present. We easily get paralyzed by ruminating on past mistakes we cannot change, or projecting anxieties onto a future we cannot control. Secular mindfulness acts as a practical tool to sever that mental time travel. By intentionally paying non-judgmental attention to the current moment, you force your brain to engage with reality exactly as it is unfolding, right now. The present is the only place you actually have the power to act, and those actions rarely happen in isolation. We are social primates, wired deeply for cooperation. Survival has always depended on forming dense connections, pulling our individual focus outward toward the group. Your self-actualization finds its maximum resonance when it impacts others. Whether it is nurturing a family, contributing to science, or building a community, applying your unique energy to the flourishing of the people around you grounds your personal journey in a shared reality. Meaning is never something you stumble across under a rock. It is a highly active construction project, built moment by moment through conscious action and human connection. If we are entirely free to create our own meaning, how do we stop that freedom from collapsing into selfish chaos? Society still needs an objective way to agree on what is right and wrong. The first pillar, rational ethics, uses reason to identify moral principles based on observable human needs. It rejects the idea that morality requires a divine command, arguing instead that we can identify how certain actions, like cruelty, inherently produce suffering, while others, like cooperation, foster the well-being required for a stable society. The second pillar, utilitarianism, scales those outcomes up. It judges the morality of an action by its consequences, aiming to minimize deep suffering and maximize long-term flourishing for the greatest number of people in the matrix. The third pillar, virtue ethics, moves away from calculating specific situations and focuses entirely on the individual's character. It is the lifelong practice of cultivating positive daily habits, like honesty, courage, and compassion. This traces directly back to Aristotle. He argued that if you consistently practice these ethical habits, right actions follow naturally, leading to eudaimonia, a state of genuine human flourishing and living well. The final pillar is the social contract. To leave a chaotic state of nature, free people rationally agree to give up a small amount of absolute freedom in exchange for mutual protection. We see this manifested daily in democratic laws and civil rights: rationality, outcomes, character, and agreement. These four distinct frameworks interlock to form a highly sophisticated, objective moral architecture. It requires no divine authority, relying entirely on human reason and empathy. The humanist framework removes the safety net of blind faith in a cosmic plan. In its place, it demands active, conscious, and rational participation in reality. You are the architect designing the blueprint. You are the builder doing the labor. And your own brief, improbable existence is the raw material used to construct your purpose. So the question is what you will do with the material. Choose one specific action today that leverages your unique potential. Define your essence through a concrete choice and shape it into something that contributes to the people around you. A universe without a predetermined instruction manual can be deeply intimidating, but that exact absence of a plan is the only thing that gives you the freedom to truly define yourself.